the Centurion story. A41 Centurion, they start designing it as a heavy cruiser tank as early as 1943. We've still got that idea we talked about earlier, light tanks, although we're now doing that with wheeled armour. We've just seen our Daimler armoured car. We're looking at cruiser tanks still, and the A41, what's going to become the Centurion, is called a heavy cruiser. We've pretty much given up on the idea of an infantry tank, but at the same time as they order the Centurion, they order a tank called the A45. We forget about that one. It's going to be a bigger, heavily more armoured vehicle that we're going to use alongside, supposedly, the Centurion. Centurion is ready in its first model. It's got lots of innovation on it. It's ready to go in May of 1945. And of course, it misses the end of the war by about a couple of weeks. Operation Sentry takes place where we take some of those first early model Centurions. They've got different armament arrangements. We take them out to Germany. They miss the end of the fight, but we test them till July 1945 and then bring them back. We realise with the Centurion, there's a good combination there. We've got that famous Meteor engine, what I talked about earlier, the Merlin engine, 600 horsepower. We uprate that in its service life, so plenty of oomph to drive that vehicle around. We get rid of the bow machine gun that we can see in all those earlier World War II British vehicles. The Beza needs a 90-degree plate. That's why we have that step front on things like the Comet, the Churchill, etc. We now have a lovely sloped glacé plate on the front. Better, as was mentioned earlier, it thickens the amount of armour, an anti-tank round going parallel to the ground, a horizontal approach. It's got more armour to penetrate, and you might get a deflection, of course, as well. We designed the A41 Centurion. Part of its remit, we might have a bigger gun coming. The very first Centurions have a 17-pounder. You can see one in our World War II display. 17-pounder gun, the one we put on the Firefly, cracking gun, very good ammunition. We end up realising 20-pounders on its way. Let's build a tank we can upgrade the firepower. So again, we've got new things going on there. They're thinking ahead. And all in all, that combination, when it comes together with a bit of fettling, turns out to be the Centurion that many blokes in the audience, you might have had your dinky toy. It's the classic looking tank. So we are very pleased today because we've got a range of Centurions coming on. And one of the early ones here comes from the Royal Netherlands Army. They turn up pretty much every year with bringing something from their props department. We're really pleased to have them here again. And they bought one of the Dutch Army Centurions. Again, lots of countries in Europe that were allowed to sell the Now in 1950 the Korea War started and Britain was just at the point we were trying to raise money. We were a bankrupt nation after World War II, selling tanks as a way of raising money. Unfortunately the country's queuing up to buy the Centurion. We're going to see a Swiss Centurion a little bit later on. Unfortunately what happens is because of the Korean War, we now need all our tanks for ourselves or for our immediate allies. So some countries, such as Switzerland, who ordered their Centurions in 1950, they don't get them to 1955. The Dutch start with a small order of Centurion. They're a NATO ally, that's good for us. We can supply them over and above people like the Swiss, who aren't a NATO ally at the time. So here they buy and they upgrade every country the Pfizer Centurion does a little bit of difference to it. So we can see on this one, the spare wheels come off the back of the turret there. The searchlight, different countries, different types, white searchlight, white box, the battlefield, infrared photography system that can detect the light coming back. Now this Dutch Army Centurion did not get the gun upgrade. Some tanks later on, this has still got the 20-pounder gun on, later tanks will see, if you have a look, you'll see those subtle differences between the different countries and those different tank guns. Now, one of the other things going on in the background, at the same time as we're building the Centurion, we have a worry in the West that the Russians have got their JS3 tanks in service. When Stalin dies in, I think it's, what is it, 51, 52, they changed the title of those JS3 tanks. They're heavy Russian tanks, 122mm gun. They changed the title to T10. Stalin gets forgotten about quickly. We are worried. We've seen a T10 tank. What's coming next? We think the Russians are going to be building an even bigger tank. So in the background we start heavier tank programs. One leads to the Conqueror tank that goes into service in 1955 with a 120mm gun on it. What if that gun's not enough as well? We might need a 180mm, they think. Big enough gun to knock out the future Soviet heavy tanks. So this is why we end up with this business now. FV4005, it goes through a couple of iterations. They start by trying to design an assisted loading system because the rounds on this are so big. They break them down anyway, the projectile first, and then you load in the case with all the propellant that's going to blast that round out the end of the barrel. They start by trying to come up with a sort of assisted loader system. Looked like an auto loader, it actually wasn't. And then there's this worry, what if this attack from Russia, what if the threat from the Warsaw Pact comes sooner than we expect? So they come up with this second iteration. We might have been able to build these in a hurry should the threat start emerging quicker than we wanted it to. Hence, this is the second iteration of the vehicle with that cab on the top, that turret system there. They've got it to the point they can angle that gun about 45 degrees either side of the centre line so that it won't go fire sideways, because even with, you can see on the back there, they've got a ground anchor to anchor it into the ground. If you turn the gun 90 degrees, so much pressure you'll probably turn the tank over. About 80 tons of back blast they measure it as every time that gun fires. This one would have had two loaders in the back. You pick up a whopping great round. They're firing what they call HESH rounds, high explosive squash head. It's a round that's full of basically plastic explosive. It pancakes against the enemy vehicle and then detonates and sends a shockwave through the armour. They fire about 500 rounds from this vehicle in testing, so it's proven, but unfortunately the rate of fire, you can really, even on a good day, only get about 2 rounds a minute off of this because the time it takes to load. 1955, they stopped the programme, and the reason for that is 2 different reasons. One, in the background, it emerges that Khrushchev, now the Russian president, or in charge basically. He doesn't like heavy tanks. He stopped the Russian heavy tank program. And the second reason, the key reason, is now we can get anti-tank missiles to do the same job at distance with greater penetration and accuracy than firing missiles from an A3 gun with huge rounds. One of the problems with the rounds, they're so big, and head rounds tend to be a bit slow through the air because it's like firing a dustbin. Those rounds can be blown off target out to about 2,000 metres away, etc. So they're not too sure if this is the best way to go. And missiles tend to take over, or we end up, as we find out as we look at the Centurion story, there's perhaps other ways we can develop our tank guns. But that FB4005, some of you here may have helped towards its restoration. The guys driving it to the team that helped put that one back together again, so it's really good for us to be able to see it here. And we've got a vehicle that, to put it bluntly, that turret used to be in our play area many years ago. No one interested, because it appeared in the World of Tanks game, because everyone starts learning about it. Now we've got it back into a running order, so quite an achievement there for the guys that actually have managed to get that running. They've added the gun truck on the front that was missing for many years, and if you look at the back, there's that ground anchor. If it was going to fire, you drop the anchor behind you. That gave you a sense of solidity, so the vehicle wouldn't actually go back too far when the gun's fired from it. The hull underneath, think of it only as a donor. What they did, they tested the vehicle on, I think it's Mark 3 and Mark 5 Centurion hulls. Whether that was going to be into production, it's a way we could carry that gun. But like many of these coastal projects, they're going on in parallel, just in the gun for this year, I think to say they're So we have some of that other Centurion family, and the point I was making earlier, 17-pounder, 20-pounder on the Dutch Army one. In 1956, in the Hungarian uprising, a T-54A was driven into the British Embassy compound in Budapest. We measured the armour thickness of that T-54. And that worried Britain because we didn't think the 20-pounder would penetrate the T-54. So we started the program to make a new gun. Now that new gun is designed at Fort Halstead in Kent. It becomes something called the L7105 gun, and we can see it on a couple more of the Centurions here. It's a fantastic bit of kit because what happens is it's so effective that it makes things like the 120 gun on Conqueror, the big heavy tank we made, makes it redundant overnight. And when it goes into service on the Centurion, we retired the Conqueror tank in 1965. Not needed anymore. It's a very accurate gun. They can fire 3 aimed rounds from the 105 gun within 20 seconds. And that's much quicker than most other tanks. It's a very effective gun all round. 35,000 tanks around the world are made with the L7105 gun. And I would argue the most famous one, of course, is the Centurion. About 8,000 Centurions made in the UK, half of them exported to other armies. And we've also got here with us, we've got a Swedish army with that jazzy camouflage scheme. That again is a late upgraded version of the Centurion. Sweden, they put a diesel engine, Continental diesel in the back. They add extra armour, reactive armour on it. They really make a difference to that tank, but it still carries on improving. Because there may still be things flying around on the battlefield. Why the Germans lost a lot of their heavy armour earlier on in the war is because they didn't have an armoured recovery vehicle till they got the Bergpanzer into service. You turn up with a big recovery truck and there's still bullet shell fire, you're in trouble. Hence the ARV. And with the ARV we made over a couple of hundred in the UK. Again, need something of an equivalent weight and size to be able to manoeuvre and tow a down tank. And there's a winch in there that, of course, they can double up the winching so they can winch bits and pieces out or do tows on the rear of the vehicle to recover a down vehicle. In British Army service, the Centurion as a gun tank went on through 13 different marks. Lots of improvements, better armour protection when we realised the Soviets had got those bigger guns like on the T-54, the 100mm. We end up improving the amount of fuel it could carry. One of the weaknesses of the Centurion is very thirsty early in its life. They did a mono trailer, you can see one in the building. Have an armoured trailer, carry it behind you, that carries fuel. It didn't really work the way we wanted it to. second one sold very early on in Sweden. And the Swedish tank, I kid you not, was given to us because the chief of the defence staff, the British Army, met the Swedes. At the end of this visit, he handed over the embossed ashtray, and the Swedes across the table basically threw back the keys to this tank and said, would you like one of your tanks back? So that's why this particular Swedish tank came all the way down back to the Tank Museum after all its upgrades. They went out of service in about 2000 with the Swedish Army there. And a lovely example of a British version of the Centurion with 105 gun on there. And in the back, we go back to that, still that meteor engine upgrade to give it a little more welly there. The Centurion, as I mentioned, great success story. It helped put Britain's tanks back on the world map, but it also is still going on. The Israelis have amazingly still got some Centurion hulls they're using in different roles. And if you go to South Africa, they've still got the Centurion in service. It's called the Oliphant. It doesn't look the same. They've added different armour around the outside. So it's one of those tank stories that fills the gap that as we go back to, as I said earlier, great World War II tank that doesn't see action in World War II. But for the next 20 years, one of the best tanks in service all around the world. Sees action in the Korean War, makes its name there. That's why lots of people want to buy it. It sees action in Vietnam with the Australian forces. It sees action in the Indo-Pakistan War of 1965. More modern American pattern tanks go out to fight the Indian Centurions. They're absolutely creamed by the Indian crews because the Indians have been trained at Lulworth. They can fire 3 rounds quickly. The more they can get 3 rounds off before the pattern tanks can even fire back. So it's also about the training of the crews. Centurion leaves the arena. You probably heard that we were hoping to get a JS3 here from our friends in Brussels. Again, that sadly broke down. We're lucky, one of the crews here, they also broke down on the motorway. It was their towing wagon, the Dutch Army. But they've all made a real effort so that we've seen one of the best displays ever of Centurions you'll ever likely to see as well. So give them a round of applause. They did rather well getting all that kit going. So thank you. And if I hand you now back to Steve.
Thank you, David. Round of applause to David Woody. What an amazing fan of knowledge he is. But there's still another tank to talk about.
Disappeared, but there we go. We're still having our little recovery variant. Probably a bit disappointed that nothing actually broke down during the course of our display. You may recall that we've actually got one of the Centurions always breaks down in this corner, which is why I was a bit suspicious when the one stopped there earlier on, but we didn't have to actually recover it. So they asked that all tanks and all British Army vehicles have to be road legal. They put rubber pads on. They call that puppy track after the shoes. So that you'll see on different vehicles going around the place. All modern British Army vehicles now, if they have to be road legal, that means rubber track. It's nothing about grip or anything that way, it's just it stops them ripping up the road too easily. So I can now finally say that was the last Centurion variant heading off from our arena, and I will now hand back to Steve Bully.